Hi, this is Pastor Steve of the Church of the Nazarene. My hope through today's program is to encourage you that life can have meaning and purpose, and it's within your reach to grab it. Even if you're not a church kind of person, I think there's something in this discussion for you today. Hear me out this morning, okay? I would like for you to think for a moment about a modern trend. You often hear people say something like, pay it forward, or do random acts of kindness, things like that. There's a kind of generous optimism in those sayings, isn't there? Somehow, if I am generous and kind to someone now, then someday somebody will be kind to me. It's a beautiful idea, isn't it? But can I trust it? Now, some of my friends and relatives don't believe in God very much anymore. So in conversations where I might say something like, I'm praying for you, they will say something like, I'm sending out positive thoughts, I'm thinking of you, or, of course, let me know if there's anything I can do. The idea is that there is a great cosmic balance of some kind, and if I think good thoughts, if I send out positive vibes, if I pay forward with some generosity, then the universe will return kindness and goodness to me someday. I just have to keep the balance shifted to the positivity side. At least that's what it seems to be saying. There was a video going around social media a few years ago. I really liked it, actually. It was produced by the government of Thailand as a public service announcement. It starts with a small boy getting slapped around by a pharmacy operator who caught him stealing medicine from her store. The commotion gets the attention of the owner of a diner next door, who intervenes. He asks the boy if the medicine was for him, and it turns out that it was for his mother, who is very sick. The diner guy pays the pharmacist for the medicine, and then he gives it to the boy with a container of soup for his mom. The diner guy has a daughter about the same age as the boy who's standing there watching, and she is frustrated because, business is tight at the diner too. But the dad is shown always feeding the poor. Then the scene changes, and the text on the screen informs us that it's 30 years later now. The diner daughter is unable to keep the diner going by herself because her dad is sick, and she has to put it up for sale. She goes to the hospital where her aged father is lying sick in bed. She kneels and drops her head on the bed. It looks like she's praying. And when she looks up, there's a business envelope on the foot of the bed. She opens it, and there is a detailed bill inside. But to her surprise, every item is marked paid. At the bottom is a handwritten note signed by the doctor. Paid in full 30 years ago with medicine and a bowl of soup. Wow, it turns out that the doctor is that little boy at the beginning of the story. Now that's a classic example of paying forward, isn't it? The idea really is a very old one, but is there a big cosmic balance keeping track of the things you do right and the things you do wrong? The ancient Egyptians thought that Anubis would weigh your heart against the feather god Ma'at on a giant balance, and if your soul was lighter than a feather, then you went to the good place. I suppose that's a related idea to what we're talking about today, and it's very old. But intriguingly, the idea appears in a different form in the Bible. The oldest part of the Christian Bible is called the Old Testament, and it is the Bible that the Jewish people use. The following verse is from the book of Ecclesiastes, one of the books of wisdom in the Bible. The verse reads like this: Cast your bread on the surface of the waters, for you will find it after many days. Divide your portion into 7 or even 8 parts, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth. Now, that's kind of a weird way to say something, isn't it? But that's because of cultural context. It was written 3,000 years ago in the Hebrew language in the Middle East, So apparently they said things differently then, right? But the idea of it is that you should take your resources, like your bread, literally your food, and put them where you have absolutely no control over what happens to them. Literally, throw them out on the sea and watch them float away. Why would you do that? I mean, that's crazy, right? But the answer to that is right in the verse. It says to cast your bread on the waters, and you will find it after many days. I mean, somehow the bread will come back to you. But there's more. It goes on to say, don't just throw your food out on the sea as a single blob in a single moment of time, but you should divide it into 7 or 8 portions and throw them out separately, because you don't know what misfortune might come to some of them. Now, obviously, this saying is a metaphor. It doesn't mean to literally throw your bread out in the ocean. It doesn't mean that you are guaranteed a return on your investment. But it does mean that if you give away resources like food, not expecting to get anything back, then you will get something back when you need it. But how does that work? I don't think that the author of this Bible verse believes that there's some kind of great cosmic balance. He believes in God. Listen to how the passage continues from where I was reading before. Cast your bread on the surface of the waters, for you will find it after many days. Divide your portion to 7 or even to 8 parts, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth. Just as you do not know the path of the wind, and you don't know how bones are formed in the womb of a pregnant woman, so you do not know the activity of God who makes everything. Now, did you catch that? The writer is saying that while there is chaos in life, there's hidden meaning too. So you can't understand it all or predict what the future holds. Just know that in everything, the Creator God is working in ways that you don't necessarily see. The passage as a whole communicates the principle of doing as much good as you can, knowing 2 things. The results are in God's hands, and you don't know when you will be in need yourself. There's an Old Testament story that kind of illustrates what I'm talking about. There was a prophet named Elijah living at a time when the king of Israel married a woman from another country who worshipped another religion. He converted to her practices and started forcing the people of Israel to convert to their religion too. Elijah followed God and led a resistance to that change, and God worked many spectacular miracles through his story. I don't have time to tell about all that, but at one point, Elijah is living in a shady spot next to a stream because the land has been in a severe drought for several years. But when the stream finally dried up, Elijah prayed. God sent Elijah to the home of a widow in a nearby town to ask for some bread. And while that was happening, the widow found that she only had enough flour and oil to make one more loaf of bread for herself and for her son. She made up her mind to go ahead and make that last loaf and feed her son with it, and then wait as she starved to death herself. But Elijah came and told her to make a loaf for him first. I mean, think of that. It's easy for us to help someone when it doesn't cost anything, but it's a lot harder to help someone when it puts you or your loved ones at risk. Here, let me read a passage from the book of 1 Kings that tells this story. Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you've decided to do. But first, make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have, and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says to you today. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will never run dry until the day that the Lord sends rain on this land." Now talk about casting bread on the water. Let me interpret. Give Elijah your last food and trust that God will bring you some more. Let's read on. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and for her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the promise that the Lord had given her, spoken by Elijah. All right, let's try to internalize that. She did what Elijah asked her to do, which may be the biggest miracle of the story, since both she and her son might starve to death as a result. But unexpectedly, every day when she made more bread, the jar of flour and the jug of oil stayed full. It was a true miracle. It was a miraculous appearance of new bread every day, but in another sense, it was the miracle of bread which was cast on the water, returning to her. Do you get that? The story of Elijah and the widow teaches us to trust that God is going to help us make up the difference when we are called to help someone. Elijah was starving and homeless, but she shared her little bit with him. In return, God provided the food they needed every day until the drought ended. And just to put an exclamation point on the story, the passage finishes by relating that sometime later the widow's son got sick and died. But Elijah cried out to the Lord, "Lord, my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die? Oh Lord, my God, let this boy's life return to him." And the Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Now, did you get that? The widow helped Elijah, and then he helped her, and miracles started happening, and her son was raised from the dead. In some hidden way, in the midst of drought and national strife, God brought two people together who needed each other's help, and then, in some miraculous way, he gave them all the material things they needed to survive. Look, I'm trying to convince you this morning that stories like this are not the result of a great cosmic balance. They are not evidence of some nameless, unknowing force. Like a giant spring driving the cosmic wheels of the universal clock. It was not written in fate that a Thai shopkeeper would one day be treated by a doctor that he helped out as a boy. And it was not by chance that God's prophet came to this particular widow. It was God himself that was topping up her jars with flour and oil every day. Our universe is chaotic, to be sure. I know that bad things happen too. Our society is full of individuals constantly making choices that are at odds with each other. Everyone is destined to die, and powers and principalities are at war all around us. And the rain falls on good people and bad people both. It all seems so random, doesn't it? But the passage that we're reading from in the Bible today teaches us that just as you don't know the path of the wind, and you don't know how babies form in the womb of a pregnant woman, in the same way, you cannot know the activity of God who makes everything as he works behind the scenes. So, how are we to live in the middle of all of that? The key thing is to understand that all through the chaos, God is working out his agenda. You can go your own way if you want to. Lots of people do, and God allows that. But some people try for something better. The New Testament in Romans 8:28 teaches us the following. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. It's saying that hidden in the chaos is a divine organization. God is working out all the things that happen, good and bad, so that they come together and his desires are met. And please just know that his desire for you is a plan for good, not for evil, for a future and a hope. And it is this working of God in the universe that he himself created that things finally work out for the believer who tries to live rightly. If you live your life according to God's purpose, if you live your life spreading goodness where you go, it is God's goodness that comes back to you. One of the most popular parables that Jesus Christ taught us is the parable of the Good Samaritan. In the parable, a Jewish man is walking along the road where he is robbed and beaten and left on the side of the road to die. Religious leaders walk right by his lifeless body and they don't help him. They go on their way. The person who does finally help him was of low social status. But this man applies first aid. He puts the beaten man on his donkey and he takes him to a bed and breakfast place and he pays the owner to nurse the beaten man back to health. Compassion like this was unheard of, but God knew what he did. Jesus himself told the story. Jesus wasn't impressed by religiosity. He was impressed by the man who was trying to live right, who was casting his bread upon the water wherever he went. Hey, that sounds like a good way to live, doesn't it? So my proposal is, do something kind this week, okay? We'll talk again next week.